Machine here, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. 20-minute video for 2 minutes worth of content. Gold.
I've noticed a lot of people seem in and out when it comes to the new Team Liquid lineup with Stewie. Sure, they won iBuyPower Masters. They beat Australis in a best of 3. It was looking so good. They won an event Australis attended. Seemed to have broken the streak, right? The curse, except... was it a really big, prestigious international tournament? Not really, right? iBuyPower Masters obviously even had problems in how it was executed. Then they went to the major. They had a bracket that looked like all these teams they could beat. They could get to the final. They can actually play Australis in the final there. Maybe they can beat them. A number of people had them in their pick'ems to win. They failed in the very beginning step of the playoffs. They lost in the quarterfinals to Ents, who at the time wasn't a top-ranked team, wasn't a team expected to be able to beat Team Liquid. Then they went to the Blast. They did pretty well at Blast. They, again, managed to face off against Australis, this time in the final again. What do you know? They won a map against them. They had a similar veto that they'd had at iBuyPower Masters. In fact, the very same veto. This time, they got wrecked on the last 2 maps, and it kind of made some fans, I think, think, right, more of the same. You know, that one result was just because it was iBuyPower Masters, and it wasn't the biggest tournament in the world, and the stage wasn't quite as big, and so maybe the pressure wasn't as big. And okay, they beat them that one time, but now Australis has adapted, and they beat them on Overpass, so does it really matter? Like, some people... I think are more hyped about Ents, or maybe they hoped, I mean, obviously they've had problems recently, but maybe they hoped MIBR would be this team that came along and really challenged Australis. But I want to give people some hope here and outline. I think one of the things that's crazy about Team Liquid, yes, I love the lineup, I love some of the potential there, haven't quite got it all together yet, and certainly they've had some failures along the way, but their map pool is really exciting, and in a way their previous map pool was not. Previously, they had a very good map pool, one of the better map pools in the world, not the best. It was, Australis were by far the best. At one point in the summer, Navi's was the second best. Team Liquid was second or third, depending on where you were at during the year, so it was still pretty good. But the problem was, since they always faced Australis in the final, except that one time that they played Mouse Sports in the New York final, where, I mean, something of a miracle for Mouse Sports, something of a collapse from Team Liquid. The problem was, the one team they had a really bad matchup against was Australis map pool-wise. In fact, as an article in the description below, I wrote about that before the last final they played them in 2018 with the tackle lineup, explaining that there was nowhere Team Liquid could go in this map pool, and that's why they had to gamble. Even then, the gambles weren't guaranteed to work, and all the maps that there were strengths of theirs, Australis were there already, were ahead of them, and thus were going in theory to win the majority of the time, but obviously we know won almost all the time. I mean, they still lost the occasional map to Team Liquid, but not with enough consistency that Team Liquid could even feel like they had a home map against Australis. So you look at the new map pool. First of all, they've only played 5 maps on land so far. Of those 5, 4 of them they are playing at a high level, at least when you look at the context of the maps and the opponents they've played. So their best map at the moment is DOS 2. They've won 5 out of 6 games on it. They beat Fnatic on it. They beat Australis on it. Obviously, that was in the final of iBuyPower Masters. They beat Na'Vi on it at the major. I mean, remember, Australis has been a pretty strong team on DOS 2 overall. Lost very, very rarely. Na'Vi, okay, Na'Vi's actually not that great a team on it. They're one of the best teams in the world still, but they're not that great a team on DOS 2, admittedly. They lost. Their one game was to Australis, even that was a 13-16 loss. That was at Blast Pro Series, obviously, but 13-16, still a very close game. Australis, one of the very best teams on DOS 2. They beat MIBR, who obviously showed signs of being decent on the map. They thrashed them actually 16-2 at Blast Pro Series. And then they again beat Australis, 16-3, smashed Australis in the final of Blast Pro Series. Now, in doing so, they won every single T-side of all 6 of these games they played on DOS 2. Now, that is very exciting because aside from Team Liquid, the other teams that are very, very good on DOS 2, of the elite teams, it's only Australis. And Australis, quite frankly, they started in the last few months of last year to pick it as a punish against specific teams who were bad on DOS 2. But it's not like it's Australis' favourite map. Obviously, if they get the choice, they're going to pick Nuke, they're going to pick Infernal maps that they are absurdly good on with insane map records, and more fits the kind of tactical style of Australis, a style that's more consistent, fits team play over individual skill as much. So Astralis probably is never going to make Dust 2 their primary focus. At the moment, Team Liquid could do that. They've got the skill in the lineup to do that. They've got the dynamic, versatile players to do that. They've got more of a free-flowing style, I feel like, with Stewie in the lineup than when they had Tak on the lineup, which was a bit more set and a bit more predictable who's going to do what and where. And then you look at the fact that if they're an elite team that can specialize in Dust 2, they can fuck a lot of teams up with punishes. Now, admittedly, it's been very, very hard to make Dust 2 a consistent map with any version, the old version, the rework now. But you know what? We said the same thing with Inferno, the old version and the newer version. The old version was so balanced. The newer version of Inferno, until Astralis went complete God mode, seemed like no one could master it because the CT economy was too tricky to balance. It was really, really hard to team play off each other and know how to rotate between the sites. Well, if Astralis can master that and have the godlike record they've had in Inferno, Team Liquid's showing signs that they can be a team like that on Dust 2. And so that's a very, very dynamic, exciting map to have as a potential pick home map. And as you'll see, they don't even need a home map right now. Then you go to Overpass. Now, this was a map the old Team Liquid lineup didn't particularly like. Like, basically, at one point in time, they swapped their permaban from Train to Overpass at the latter part of the year, and they were starting to play Train occasionally, and they were avoiding Overpass. They didn't want to play any part of that map. It wasn't one that they liked at all. Now, they've won 4 times, they've tied once, and they've lost once. So they beat Astralis on it at iBuyPower Masters in the 3rd deciding map, which is how they were actually able to win that tournament. They beat a Vanguard on it. Well, Vanguard's certainly a team that can play it. Yeah, it was a close game, but they beat them on it. They beat NIP, a team that bizarrely doesn't have a very good record on it in terms of wins, but has a really good record in terms of rounds won within it, amount of games that they're in, and against the other good Overpass teams. They beat NIP again, this time 16-3. They tied Ents, who plays the map, has a good record, and it's not one of their strongest maps, but obviously Ents in good form and have beaten and played well against Team Liquid. And that was the game where Liquid didn't actually have to win the game in order to go to the final of Blast Pro Series. So they didn't necessarily have the same incentive to win. It was a bizarre game, that, due to the weird format of the tournament. And then finally, they lost on it once, which was in the 3rd deciding map of Blast Pro Series, where they got smashed 16-2. And the interesting detail here, obviously, is you look at that as a map, sure, it's not that great a map for Astralis. You think of some of the losses they've had in the latter part of last year. They've certainly been beaten on that map, likes of Na'Vi have done so. But it's Astralis, and Astralis is incredible, right? They are one of the great outliers in history. In fact, if they end up being the greatest team of all time, I'd say they currently are, but will they be by the end of CSGO? Who knows? You can somewhat put them as an outlier and say ignore them from the what we're talking about. In which case, if we ignore Astralis for a moment, Team Liquid's never lost on the map with this particular lineup. Crucially, ignoring that Astralis game at Blast Pro Series in the final, obviously I'm counting the ones that I had earlier, which you can say whether that's unfair or not. They won every single CT side except for that big stomp that they had in the deciding game of the Blast Pro Series final. So there's another sick map. And again, how many teams out there are specialising in Overpass? Of the elite teams, it was only really Na'Vi. That was Na'Vi's go-to pick for many, many months in 2018. By the end of the year, though, they started to swap away from it and go to some other maps occasionally. Who else out there of the elite teams wanted to play Overpass? FaZe didn't really. Mouse Sports, not really. That's not a map that you're going to see Mouse Sports play with the old lineup, but we don't know about the new one yet. MIBR, haven't played it in quite a while. They looked pretty good occasionally when they did play it. There wasn't really many top teams. Again, it was the lesser teams that were playing Overpass, so a great map to have in your tool house to be able to pull out, to potentially have as a home map or swap in as an alternate home map if you don't want to play Dust 2 against someone. Then we go to Mirage. Now, Mirage, they only have a 2-2 record on, 50% win rate. But you look at who they've played. So they've beaten Luminosity. Yeah, not that good a team, 16-11. They lost to Fnatic, 17-19. Overtime game, so very, very close game. And that's Fnatic. Like, that's Fnatic's home map, basically. That's their best map. And their best player, Crims, who's one of the best players in the world, one of the most consistent players in the world, that's his home map. He's always been a god on the CT side there, and he still is. He's an incredible player there. So losing to them in overtime, I know Fnatic now isn't in the greatest form. That's no shame, though. That's a specialist on that map. Then you go and look, they beat Na'Vi 16-14. Na'Vi's always played Mirage ever since they had Electronic in their lineup from the very, very beginning. They were an Inferno Mirage team initially, then they were a Mirage Overpass Train team. That's where Na'Vi's been as a squad. So, close game, yes, but you've beaten them, and they have the best player in the world, simple. Finally, the one other loss, so 2 wins, 2 losses, was against Ents. It was 11-16, so still double digits. It was against Ents, who've shown us some pretty good games on Mirage overall. They've seems like one of the maps that they've been able to really harness within the rest of their own pretty good pool, and they've risen as a team and become now an elite team themselves. So 2-2 record, bit deceptive there actually. Then you look at Cache. Cache is the fourth map. They've played it twice. They've won both games. Obviously, Cache, not a very played map in the world. Cache and Nuke, the two least played for most tournaments in 2018 going forwards. They beat Fnatic on it. Fnatic plays the map sometimes. Beat them heavily, 16-8. All Team Liquid was playing the map as well. They beat FaZe Clan, 16-8. FaZe Clan sometimes has to play it. Obviously, they've got a lot of skill. People like Nico know how to call around it. He always has. They beat those guys as well. So these are decent to very good sides, depending on who we're talking about here. And crucially, when they played on Cache, admittedly only 2 games, they were able to stomp both sides. They were able to stomp a CT side game, and they were able to stomp a T side game. So very, very positive signs. Again, not a lot of teams play Cache, but unless you ban it, that means it's a great punish pick to pick against someone. So you've got home maps of DOS2 and Overpass, and you've got a great punish in Cache. That already makes for a very interesting matchup. Now, what's interesting is, because they've only played those 4, where on paper it looks at a high level, people might say, right, well, there was a 5th map you mentioned, Thorin. This is what's interesting. There may yet be a 5th map they play at a very high level, and that could be Inferno, because their record on Inferno is 1-3. Their only win came against Ghost Gaming, who definitely plays that map, 16-8, strong win at iBuyPower Masters. They lost to Astralis, got stomped on it 16-4, but Astralis on this version of Inferno, you can actually start making a case when you consider how many teams play Inferno, how difficult it is to be consistent, how hard it is to be good on both sides, and the context of the era Astralis plays in. There's literally a case to be made that Astralis might be better on Inferno than they are on Nuke, because the sample size is way more and the win rate is still insane, and the circumstances they win from are bonkers. And obviously all the best Inferno teams tend to play them on it, whereas even the best Nuke teams avoid Astralis on Nuke. So getting stopped by them is not the kind of like black mark people might think, so that's not such a big deal. Another loss was to Ents. That was in overtime. First of all, Ents has risen up. Inferno's a map we know Ents can play. It was an overtime loss, so no shame in that, right? Yeah, on paper you're supposed to beat Ents, but we've seen that they're much better than their on-paper result was. Then the last loss was to Astralis again. This one was closer, it was 16-8. Still a bit of a stomp. You want to see them get a double digits, hopefully. Maybe you just avoid it against Astralis. If you avoid it against Astralis, this looks like a map that should be playable against many, many teams. So that's potentially 5 maps. Now, the 6th and 7th map, the maps that Team Liquid has not played, are Train and Nuke, 2 maps that they've banned against people. But you look at that, I could even speculate they could potentially be good on both. I could certainly see them being good on one. And I think those are maps where, with their skill level, and particularly because their skill level on this team, they're an incredibly skilled team. I think they're the most skilled team in the world for me, both collectively and man for man. Great on-paper roster, and even in the server you see this great skill distribution. With that kind of a skill level, you could have a really sick CT side on Nuke and Train. You can just frag people's heads off, you have an AUG, you hold an angle. There's no reason you can't have monster CT halves and beat teams. Maybe not the best teams in the world on Train Nuke, sure. Maybe you avoid Ents, and you avoid Na'Vi, and you avoid Astralis. You know what, if it's anyone else, hey, if they want to pick it, you can get wins off them, and that way you can get the 2-0s in best-of-3 series that are so elusive and make you not just a very good team, but potentially the number 1 team and one of the greatest teams of all time. That's something Team Liquid couldn't always do in the past, depending on the opponent they played. Now, what's interesting here is when we go deeper than just the maps, and we go and we look at the map veto approach. This is interesting, and I certainly wonder here, sure, bringing Stewie into the lineup, mixing up some of the roles, it's going to affect your map pool. I always say, even changing one player for me makes a new lineup. Some tendencies remain from the other one, but sometimes it can be a drastic effect. It's not as simple as even just 20% change. It can be more than that, because it can be more than just the player. Lots of things can shuffle around, right? But you look at the map pool, I actually start to think that Adren's had some good influence on this team in that respect, because their veto now, really fucking good. So let's look at the first ban. I've even broken this down for you. So they've played 5 different series, therefore they've had 5 chances to ban a map first. Of those 5 times, they've banned 3 different maps: Overpass, Nuke, and Train. Now here's the context of how they banned them. When they were playing at iBuyPower Masters, they banned Overpass against Fnatic. At the time, that Fnatic lineup had won 3 of their last 4 on Overpass. Not all to great teams, but you know what? Fnatic's not a team with a deep map pool. So the guys from Liquid said, let's get Overpass the fuck out there. Now, they didn't ban Overpass against any other opponent in any best-of-3 since then. Well, guess what? As a result, I mean, we've seen that they're good on Overpass themselves. That means, because they got a deep and not insanely wide, but wide map pool, they're willing to go between maps. They're not just going to stick stubbornly to one. That is what the old Team Liquid used to sometimes do, just always pick Inferno against many of these teams. No, they were willing to even ban out a strong map just to make sure Fnatic really had no chance in that series. Then at iBuy Masters as well, they played Astralis. What do you think they banned? Nuke, of course, right? Astralis has never lost with that lineup on Nuke, so Team Liquid's never played it with this lineup. Let's just get it the fuck out there. But you know what? We're not going to ban Nuke against everyone. Then they went against Na'Vi, a team not a threat to pick Nuke. They're not very good at the moment. What did they ban against the Na'Vi, right? Overpass, maybe? Na'Vi's really good at Overpass. Sometimes that's a map they like to pick in the past year, right? No, because against Na'Vi, Team Liquid's not afraid to play Overpass. So as a result, Team Liquid banned Train at the Major against Na'Vi, a map that Na'Vi had won 5 out of the last 6 on. Let's just get that out there. We don't play Train at the moment, and we're not going to play Na'Vi on Train. We'll play them on any other map. We've got a good veto against them. Then, at the same Major, they played against ENCE, right? Now, we know they lost the series 0-2, but in the veto phase, the first ban was very, very good, because what did they ban against ENCE? The map you have to ban against ENCE, a map that Liquid doesn't play, Train. And the reason they banned it against Train, ENCE was on a 12-game winning streak on LAN. Now, not all against top teams, but if you don't play it anyway, and there's better maps out there in the pool for you, just get it out there, showing again you're not stubborn. In fact, you're shifting your ban based on the opponent's strengths. Finally, the last ban they did was a Blast Pro Series in the final against Astralis, and of course it was Nuke again, because Astralis has never lost on it, and we've yet to see Liquid play it, so why bother? You already had a nice veto against Astralis, let's go back and run that back again. The same one from iBuy Masters, they did. It didn't work this time, but it would be better than letting Nuke through, right? Then you go and you look, skip past the pick for a second, we'll get to that. Let's look how the veto philosophy goes into the second ban. So you do your ban, both teams, you both pick a map, and then you do the second ban, and that leaves the decider, right? That's how we decide the third map. In 5 different series, Liquid has banned 5 different maps. Now, when I told you they have at least 4 with pretty good records when you look at the context, again, what you're seeing here is these guys are willing to switch it up to make sure they neutralize strengths of the opponent and get to strengths for Team Liquid and create really good series that are giving them great chances to win best of 3s. So you go and you look at iBuy Masters, they banned Inferno against Fnatic. Fnatic at that time had won their last 3 on Inferno, including a win over the previous Team Liquid lineup, which was very good on Inferno, at IM Chicago. Then at iBuy Masters, they banned Mirage against Astralis. Astralis was 6-1 on Mirage at the time. I know Astralis has lost a bunch of times on Mirage, so we always think of that as a weak map, but this is such a sick team, Astralis, that they go through cycles of becoming strong on their weak maps again when people start trying to force it into them. So Astralis was 6 out of their last 7 on Mirage. What a great ban to get out of the way. Let's play them on Overpass instead. Then at IEM, they switched it up again. They banned Overpass, a map that I've just told you they're actually very strong on. They're beating Astralis on, but they banned Overpass second rotation against Na'Vi. So against Na'Vi, they got Train and Overpass the fuck out of there. This is how good these guys are in the veto phase. Na'Vi at the time, 6 of their last 7 had won. The one loss for Na'Vi had been an overtime loss. So you had to get away from Overpass, and they did, even though it was a strength of Team Liquid. They didn't get drawn into that and let the third map be one that both teams were really strong on. Then the second to last one was against ENCE at IEM in the quarterfinals. Actually, this wasn't a bad veto either. They haven't played Nuke, so they banned Nuke against ENCE, who won 4 out of their last 6. Said, let's get that out there as well. We never got to the third map against ENCE, but obviously that would have been an interesting series. Finally, against Astralis, what did they ban this time around? Well, obviously, they already took Nuke out, so what's the second ban they did against Astralis? Wasn't Mirage again this time. This time, they were actually willing to potentially play Astralis on Mirage. What they banned this time was Train. Astralis was 3 wins on Train in the last 3 games on it, including a win over ENCE in the final of the Major. And as I said, ENCE had been on a sick winning streak on that map. What a great ban, right? Again, to get yourself the nice veto that you wanted and force Astralis to giving you the same 3 maps as at iBuy Masters. So you're seeing there's a philosophy here, there's fluidity here. This is a very, very dangerous approach for opponents. It's making it hard for opponents. Opponents have to look at their own strengths and expect them to be banned out. That's tough to do, right? Instead of looking at the strength of the opponent thinking, well, they might give us that because they're good on it. No. Now the opponent has to play the chess game with you. Now let's look at the picks. In 5 series, They've obviously had 5 picks, and they've had 3 different maps that they've picked. Now, what that shows you is, as you're going to see by the context, they're both punishing opponents with picks, and they're showing their strength with picks. So when they played against Fnatic at iBuy Power Masters, they picked Cash. Now, at the time, Fnatic had won their last 2 Cash games. But what the fuck does iBuy Power care? iBuy Power wins their games on Cash, and this was a show of strength. They were saying to Fnatic, you don't play this map that much, you prefer other maps, we'll play on this map, we'll fuck you up on it. And they did. Then they went to the same tournament against Astralis. And what did they pick against Astralis? Now, this was incredibly bold. They actually picked Inferno against Astralis. Astralis had won their last 11 on that map. Now, as I said, when you look at the context, Team Liquid look as though they could yet be a strong team on Inferno. They didn't win this one. Astralis is godlike on that, but that was actually to show confidence against Astralis. Then you go at IEM against Na'Vi. They picked Dust 2, a map that now they've shown themselves to be sick on. But actually, just looking at Na'Vi's weakness at that time, Na'Vi had won 2 of their last 7, and some of those losses were fucking stomps by the opponent. What a great pick against Na'Vi, and guess what? It worked out. Then you go and look against ENCE. They picked Inferno. Now, ENCE actually also, just like before with Astralis, was very strong on Inferno. They'd won 6 of their last 7. Admittedly, not all against top teams, some of them tier 2, tier 3. And so as a result, Liquid was saying, we think we're going to be really good on Inferno. We're willing to play you on this. We're willing to play the best team in the world on it. We'll play you on it as well, and so we'll fuck you up. Now, they didn't. That was a loss for them. But that was a show of strength. Finally, at the Blast Pro Series against Astralis in the final, they picked Dust 2. Astralis was 5 of their last 6 on it. But 5 of the last 6 means they lost 1, and they lost 1 to Team Liquid at iBuy Power Masters. In fact, it had been Astralis' pick at the time. So as a result, they were showing, guess what, we beat you on it last time. You might beat everyone else on it, but we'll play on it again. And of course, they did win this particular one. So you're seeing with the picks, they've not only got the good map pool, it's not like on paper they've got the good map pool. They know it's a good map pool, and they're going around this map pool. Now, what's great about this is not only does that literally give this team potential to match up with every other team in the scene. I literally think right now that with the way that they're picking and vetoing across both the first ban, the second ban, and their picks and varying them all, that this team can literally match up favourably, at least at this moment, before I've seen them play more map. I would pick, except for against Astralis, I would make them a favourite against any team in the veto. If they veto like this, they would be a favourite. That's how well they're managing the veto and how well their map pool has come along with this new lineup. Now, what's interesting is, we might say about Thorin, similar things could be said last year, right? Very good map pool, matchup and veto against many of the top teams. First of all, not as dynamic, not as dangerous as a result, hence why they could sometimes get upset. Also, they would sometimes give opponents maps that the opponent was strong on if they thought that meant they were strong on it. They're not doing that very often, except with Inferno, basically. So instead, how about this? I actually think Team Liquid has a very good veto against Astralis. In fact, right now, at this moment, Team Liquid has the best map pool and veto to face up against Astralis and potentially beat them. And that's not just because they beat them at iBuy Power Masters. Yes, what were the maps they beat them on at iBuy Power Masters? Dust 2, which actually, if you remember, was picked by Astralis seemingly as a punish, and then Overpass, which was the decider. Well, just against Astralis on Dust 2, Team Liquid has won 2 out of 3 games. They're a team with a winning record against them with this lineup. Astralis is very unlikely to ban Dust 2. I mean, admittedly, Cash is going out of the map pool sooner. We're not quite sure which tournament that exactly yet. Now, in a world where Cash is still in the map pool, if Astralis bans Dust 2, well, now all of a sudden Team Liquid can pick Cash. We know they played already. That's potentially an open chance to win there as well. And that's another skill-based map. There's a map that Astralis is going to have a hard time getting their full extent and dominance tactically on. They can certainly be very good team player-wise. They can play a nice versatile style. They can show some tactics. It's not as tactically dominant a map overall to play against them. Similar with Dust 2, hence why Astralis has lost Dust 2 to Team Liquid. A very skilled, a more skilled opponent, in my opinion. Now, even if Cash isn't in the map pool, if Vertigo's in the map pool, is Astralis really going to pick Vertigo? Probably not, right? Just to ban Dust 2? Yeah, we'll see about that. Then you look at Overpass. So they beat Astralis on Overpass already. Overpass is a map that Astralis has had some key losses on, especially in the last 6 months or so. And that last one, which was such a stomp in the Blast Pro Series final, that does look like a bit of an outlier. It wasn't like all the other games they played on Overpass. Now, what's great is, against Astralis, the veto means they can get both of these maps, Dust 2 and Overpass, at least at the moment, till we know what happens with Vertigo, every single time they play Astralis, because of how Team Liquid's vetoing and what Astralis themselves veto and are willing to play. So that means they have a legit shot each time they play to get at least a map and potentially to win the series against Astralis. That's incredibly exciting if you were a Team Liquid fan in 2018, because that's what never obviously generally happened, right? Then you go, okay, they haven't even played Mirage against Team Liquid, against Astralis yet. We know that's a map that Astralis has actually bled losses on. Well, we know Team Liquid's good on it. You look at the caliber teams they're playing on it. That would be a really fun map to see them play on, right? If they don't get an overpass. Train is entirely untested for Team Liquid. The old lineup did beat Astralis on it. Astralis certainly still seems competent on it, but they don't particularly like it or go with it as much themselves. Although, listen, if you can beat ENCE on it, you can definitely play that map. Will they pick it as punish? I don't think so. And if they do, Team Liquid might even like to see Astralis picking that. So likely they will, because there's Inferno Nuke in the pool, right? I'd like to see that map played at some point in time. What I like about this Team Liquid lineup, it works both for the Astralis matchup and everyone, is due to that incredibly high skill level, both collectively, the entire team together, and man for man, where they are crazy skilled. That can get them wins on maps that maybe they aren't even as adept at. That's why I think if they play Nuke and Train, they could get wins on CT side there. That's why if it turns out then not as sick on Cash when they've played 10 games on it as we think, that's a skill map. That's a map you can play individually off. They can beat lesser teams on that who are good on that map. If the other team tries to pick it as a punish in a Liquid, even if Liquid doesn't turn out to tactically or in terms of understanding of the map be that adept, have a great aptitude for playing the map, because that skill is transferring into the CT side, and the CT side winning on some of these maps, on Train and Nuke, that wins you the map, basically. So I think personally, even though people are kind of down on them, they don't quite feel like Liquid's shown them that full potential, ignore players, the nature of the games. The map pool right now looks sick, and the way they're dealing with it is so exciting for the future. This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, James Harding, NateDOhDoubleG, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, Travis Greb, Tristan Jones, Daniel Olivar, Jiangheng Lu, and special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion, one of my OGs. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question. I have a monthly AMA. Perhaps you want teasers for who the next guests are on my upcoming talk shows. Maybe you want to be part of my monthly discussion where my top patrons talk to me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the description box link for Patreon.